Jimin and Jungkook are enemies. They always fight about everything, even though Jungkook always spanks Jimin and forcefully kisses him to annoy him. But he don't care, because Jimin already used to him doing those things. Jungkook was in his yard, and when he saw Jimin in theirs, he jumped over the fence to spank Jimin hard, hoping to anger him. However, Jimin just glared at him with hatred. Jungkook stayed close, not bothering Jimin further. He leaned in and kissed Jimin forcefully, biting his lip. This time, Jimin pushed him away and snapped, "Idiot, Jimin, don't do that again. Or next time, I'll hit you back, idiot." Jungkook smirked. "Well, I don't care." Jungkook chuckled at Jimin's threat, finding it amusing rather than frightening. He stepped closer, invading Jimin's personal space. "Oh, really? I'd like to see you try, Jimin." His voice was low and teasing, a challenge in his eyes. Jungkook reached out to grab Jimin's wrist, pulling him closer. "Come on, hit me if you dare. I'm right here." Jimin's eyes flashed with anger and frustration. He tried to yank his wrist free from Jungkook's grasp, but the taller man held firm. "Let go of me, idiot," Jimin snapped, his face inches from Jungkook's. Jungkook smirked, unfazed by Jimin's outburst. He tightened his hold on Jimin's wrist and used his free hand to cup the smaller man's cheek possessively. "Make me," he murmured, leaning in until their lips were a breath apart. "I dare you." His thumb brushed lightly over Jimin's bottom lip, a teasing caress. Jimin's heart raced as Jungkook invaded his space, his touch sending shivers down Jimin's spine. Despite his anger, he glared up at the taller man, hating how easily Jungkook could rile him up. "You're really asking for it," Jimin muttered, his voice barely audible. Jungkook chuckled low in his throat, the sound vibrating against Jimin's lips. "Prove it then," he whispered, his eyes locked onto Jimin's. "Show me what you've got." The tension between them was palpable, the air thick with unspoken challenges and underlying desires. Jimin knew he should push Jungkook away, should tell him off for good this time. Jimin hesitated for a moment, his resolve weakening under Jungkook's intense gaze. He could feel the heat radiating off the taller man's body, could smell the faint scent of his cologne. It was distracting, making it harder for Jimin to remember why he should be angry. But then he remembered the countless times Jungkook had annoyed him, had pushed his buttons just to get a reaction. The frustration came rushing back, and Jimin made his decision. With a sudden burst of strength, he twisted out of Jungkook's grasp and shoved him backwards. Jungkook stumbled, but managed to catch himself, looking surprised by Jimin's sudden move. Before Jungkook could react, Jimin charged forward and swung his fist at the taller man's face. His punch connected with Jungkook's jaw with a satisfying crack, snapping the idiot's head to the side. Jungkook staggered back, clearly stunned by the unexpected blow. He touched his jaw gingerly, looking at Jimin with a mix of shock and admiration. "F***CK," Jungkook muttered, shaking his head slightly. "You actually did it." He rubbed his jaw, wincing slightly at the pain, but then a slow smirk spread across his face. "Not bad, Jimin. I didn't think you had it in you." Jimin stood there panting, his heart racing from the adrenaline of finally standing up to Jungkook. He felt a mix of pride and fear, wondering what Jungkook would do next. But instead of retaliating, Jungkook started laughing, It was a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise even himself. Damn, I needed that, he said, still chuckling. You're full of surprises, Jimin. Jimin blinked, caught off guard by Jungkook's reaction. He wasn't sure what to make of it. Was Jungkook mocking him? Jimin blinked, caught off guard by Jungkook's reaction. He wasn't sure what to make of it. Was Jungkook mocking him? Or was he genuinely amused and impressed? Jimin's hand still throbbed from the punch, a reminder of the tension between them. Jungkook's laughter died down, but the smirk remained on his face as he looked at Jimin. You know, I've been wanting to see that side of you for a while now, he said, his voice low and almost affectionate. It's kind of hot. Jimin felt his cheeks heat up at Jungkook's words, a mix of embarrassment and something else he couldn't quite identify. He crossed his arms over his chest, trying to maintain his tough facade. Shut up, he muttered, looking away. But Jungkook wasn't done teasing him yet. He stepped closer, invading Jimin's personal space once again. Jungkook stepped closer, invading Jimin's personal space once again. Come on, don't stop now, he murmured, his breath ghosting over Jimin's ear. I know there's more where that came from. Jimin felt his heart skip a beat at the closeness. Jungkook's warm breath sending shivers down his spine. He tried to ignore the fluttering in his stomach and focus on his anger instead. Back off, Jimin snapped, pushing against Jungkook's chest. But the taller man didn't budge, his muscular frame unyielding under Jimin's hands. Instead, Jungkook leaned in even closer, his lips brushing against Jimin's ear as he spoke. Make me, he whispered, his voice low and challenging. Jimin swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way Jungkook's proximity was affecting him. Jimin's heart raced as Jungkook leaned in closer, his lips brushing against Jimin's ear. The taller man's warm breath sent shivers down Jimin's spine, and he could feel the heat radiating off Jungkook's body. Despite his best efforts, Jimin found himself leaning into the touch, craving more of Jungkook's attention. But then reality came crashing back, and Jimin remembered the countless times Jungkook had annoyed him, had pushed his buttons just to get a reaction. The frustration returned, mixing with the lingering desire. With a sudden burst of strength, Jimin grabbed Jungkook's shoulders and spun them around, reversing their positions. He slammed Jungkook against the nearest wall, pinning him there with his body. Jungkook looked surprised for a moment, but then a smirk spread across his face. Now that's what I'm talking about, he murmured, his eyes darkening with interest. Jimin glared at him, trying to ignore the way their bodies pressed together. Shut up, he snapped. His hands gripped Jungkook's shoulders tightly, holding him in place. Jimin's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of anger and something else he refused to acknowledge. Jungkook's smirk only widened at Jimin's outburst. He leaned in closer, his lips brushing against Jimin's jawline. Or what? He murmured, his voice low and teasing. Jimin felt a shudder run through him at the contact. Jungkook's breath hot against his skin. He tightened his grip on the taller man's shoulders, digging his fingers in slightly. I'll, Jimin trailed off, suddenly finding it hard to think straight with Jungkook. So close. Jungkook chuckled softly, the sound vibrating against Jimin's jaw. You'll what? He prompted, his hands coming up to rest on Jimin's hips. He squeezed gently, pulling the smaller man even closer. Jimin gasped at the sudden contact, feeling Jungkook's strong hands on his hips. He could feel the heat of Jungkook's palms through his clothes, branding him even through the fabric. Jimin's breath hitched, his mind struggling to focus on anything other than the feeling of Jungkook's touch. "You're playing with fire," Jimin warned, his voice barely above a whisper. But even as he said it, he made no move to pull away. Instead, he found himself leaning into Jungkook's touch, craving more. Jungkook smirked, his fingers digging into Jimin's hips possessively. "Maybe I like getting burned." Jungkook smirked, his fingers digging into Jimin's hips possessively. "Maybe I like getting burned," he murmured, his lips trailing along Jimin's jawline. "Especially if it means getting to touch you like this." His hands slid down to cup Jimin's backside, squeezing firmly. Jungkook pressed his hips forward, letting Jimin feel the growing hardness in his pants. Jimin's eyes widened at the sudden contact, a soft gasp escaping his lips. He could feel Jungkook's arousal pressing against him, hot and insistent. It sent a jolt of desire straight to his core, making him tremble in Jungkook's arms. Jungkook smirked at Jimin's reaction, his grip on the smaller man's backside tightening. "See what you do to me," he murmured, his lips brushing against Jimin's ear. "You drive me crazy, Jimina." He rolled his hips forward, grinding against Jimin slowly. Jungkook's hands slid up under Jimin's shirt, caressing the smooth skin of his back. Jimin gasped softly, his head falling back against the wall as Jungkook touched him. He could feel every ridge and contour of Jungkook's arousal through their clothes, sending waves of pleasure through his body. "Jungkook," Jimin breathed out, his voice trembling with need. He wrapped his arms around Jungkook's neck, pulling him closer. "Please." Jungkook groaned at the sound of Jimin begging for him. He captured Jimin's lips in a fierce kiss, pouring all his pent-up desire into it. His hands roamed over Jimin's body possessively, squeezing and caressing every inch of exposed skin. "I've got you," Jungkook murmured against Jimin's lips between kisses. "I'm going to make you feel so good, Jimina." His hands slid down to grip Jimin's thighs, lifting the smaller man up effortlessly. Jungkook wrapped Jimin's legs around his waist, pressing him firmly against the wall. As he continued to grind their hips together, Jungkook's arousal strained against his pants, throbbing with need as he felt Jimin's warmth pressed against him. He nipped and Su**K'd at Jimin's neck, leaving a trail of marks along the sensitive skin. Jungkook's hands slid down to grip Jimin's backside, squeezing the firm globes as he ground their hips together. F***CK Jimin, Jungkook groaned, his voice husky with desire. "You feel so good. I want you so badly." He reached between their bodies to palm Jimin through his clothes, feeling the smaller man's hardness pressing back against him. Jungkook rubbed him slowly, applying just the right amount of pressure to make Jimin gasp and squirm in his arms. "Jungkook," Jimin whimpered, his hips bucking forward into Jungkook's touch. He could feel himself growing harder by the second, his arousal aching for more friction. Jungkook smirked against Jimin's neck, loving the way the smaller man responded to his touch. Jungkook smirked against Jimin's neck, loving the way the smaller man responded to his touch. He continued to grind against Jimin, his movements becoming more urgent as his desire grew. Jungkook's hands slid under Jimin's shirt, caressing the smooth skin of his back and sides. "I'm going to make you feel so good, Jimina," Jungkook murmured against Jimin's ear, his breath hot and heavy. I'm going to make you forget about everything except me. His fingers hooked into the waistband of Jimin's pants, tugging at them teasingly. Jungkook leaned back slightly to look into Jimin's eyes, his own filled with hunger and lust. Tell me you want this, he demanded softly. Tell me you want me. Jungkook waited for Jimin's response, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see the desire and hesitation warring in Jimin's eyes, and he knew that the smaller man was on the verge of breaking. Jungkook leaned in closer, his lips brushing against Jimin's ear as he whispered, "Say it, Jimin-ah. Tell me how much you want me." His voice was low and husky, filled with a mixture of demand and pleading. Jungkook's hand slipped inside Jimin's pants, palming his hardness through the fabric of his underwear. Jungkook wrapped his fingers around Jimin's erection, stroking slowly from base to tip. He leaned in to nip at Jimin's neck, his other hand gripping the smaller man's hip possessively. "Tell me," Jungkook demanded, his voice low and commanding. "Tell me how much you want me, Jimin-ah." His thumb swiped over the sensitive head of Jimin's arousal, spreading the bead of pre-cum that had gathered there. Jungkook's touch was electric, sending shivers of pleasure through Jimin's body. Jimin gasped and arched into Jungkook's hand, his fingers tightening in the taller man's hair. F***CK, Jungkook, he panted, his voice trembling with need. I want you so badly." The admission spilled from his lips before he could stop it, a confession born of desperation and desire. Jungkook groaned at Jimin's words, his grip on the smaller man's arousal tightening. "That's it," he murmured against Jimin's neck, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin. "Tell me how much you need me." His hand moved faster, stroking Jimin with purposeful movements designed to drive him wild. Jungkook's other hand slid down to cup Jimin's backside, squeezing the firm globe. As he ground their hips together, he could feel his own arousal straining against his pants, aching for release. Jungkook nipped at Jimin's earlobe, his breath hot and heavy against the smaller man's skin. "I'm going to make you feel so good," he promised, his voice low and husky with desire. "I'm going to make you forget about everything except the feeling of my hands on your body." Jungkook's fingers tightened around Jimin's arousal, stroking him with increasing urgency. He could feel the smaller man trembling in his arms, his breath coming in short gasps as Jungkook brought him closer and closer to the edge. "Come for me, Jimin-ah," Jungkook urged, his voice low and commanding. "I want to feel you fall apart in my arms." His thumb swiped over the sensitive head of Jimin's arousal, applying just the right amount of pressure to send the smaller man over the edge. With a final cry of Jungkook's name, Jimin shattered in his arms. His release pulsed through him, hot and intense. As Jungkook continued to stroke him through it, Jimin clung to Jungkook desperately, his body shaking with the force of his O*gasm. Jungkook groaned as he felt Jimin's release pulsing through him, his own arousal throbbing in response. He continued to stroke the smaller man through his orgasm, drawing out every last tremor of pleasure until Jimin was a boneless, panting mess in his arms. Only then did Jungkook slow his movements, gentling his touch as he helped Jimin come down from his high. He pressed soft kisses along Jimin's neck and jawline, murmuring praise and affection against the smaller man's skin. "That's it, Jimin-ah," Jungkook murmured, his voice soft and soothing. "You're so beautiful when you come apart for me." He nuzzled into the crook of Jimin's neck, inhaling the scent of the smaller man's arousal and sweat. His hands roamed over Jimin's body, gently caressing the curves and dips that he had explored so thoroughly just moments before. Jungkook's own arousal strained against his pants, aching for release, but he ignored it for now. Jimin trembled in Jungkook's embrace, his body still tingling with the aftermath of his orgasm. He buried his face in the crook of Jungkook's neck, inhaling the scent of the taller man's cologne mixed with sweat. Jungkook felt Jimin's breath hitch as he kissed along his neck, the smaller man's hands gripping his shoulders tightly. He smiled against Jimin's skin, loving the way the other man responded to his touch. Jungkook's own desire was building rapidly, his hips pressing forward instinctively to seek friction. "Jungkook," Jimin gasped, arching into him. "Please." The plea was all it took to snap the last of Jungkook's control. With a growl, he captured Jimin's lips in a searing kiss, his tongue delving deep to taste the smaller man fully. Jungkook felt Jimin's breath hitch as he kissed along his neck, the smaller man's hands gripping his shoulders tightly. He smiled against Jimin's skin, loving the way the other man responded to his touch. Jungkook's own desire was building rapidly, his hips pressing forward instinctively to seek friction. "Jungkook," Jimin gasped, arching into him. "Please." The plea was all it took to snap the last of Jungkook's control. With a growl, he captured Jimin's lips in a searing kiss, his tongue delving deep to taste the smaller man fully. Jungkook's hands slid down to Jimin's hips, gripping them tightly as he ground his erection against the other man. Jimin moaned into the kiss, his own hips moving to meet Jungkook's thrusts. The friction was delicious, but it wasn't enough. Jungkook broke the kiss, panting heavily. "Need you," he growled, his voice rough with desire. "Need to be inside you." Jungkook laid Jimin gently on the bed, his eyes dark with lust as he gazed down at the smaller man. He quickly shed his own clothes, revealing his toned physique and impressive arousal. Jimin's breath caught in his throat at the sight of Jungkook's body, his own desire spiking once more. He reached for the taller man, pulling him down into a heated kiss as Jungkook settled between his thighs. Their kisses were messy and desperate, tongues tangling as they explored each other's mouths. Jungkook's hands roamed over Jimin's body, squeezing and caressing every inch of skin he could reach. He broke the kiss to trail his lips down Jimin's neck, biting and sucking at the sensitive flesh. "Jungkook," Jimin moaned, arching into the taller man's touch. "I need you inside me," Jungkook growled in response. Reaching for the lube he kept in the bedside drawer, he coated his fingers generously before pressing one against Jimin's entrance. Jungkook slowly pushed his finger inside Jimin, watching the smaller man's face intently for any sign of discomfort. Jimin's eyes fluttered shut, and a soft moan escaped his lips as Jungkook's finger slid deeper. "That's it, Jimin." Jungkook murmured encouragingly. "Relax for me." He began to move his finger gently, scissoring it to stretch Jimin's tight hole. Jimin whimpered and writhed beneath him, his hips lifting to take Jungkook's finger deeper. "More," he gasped. "I need more." Jungkook added a second finger, twisting and curling them to hit Jimin's prostate. The smaller man cried out, his back arching off the bed as pleasure shot through him. Fu asterisk K Jungkook, Jimin shouted. Right there. Jungkook smirked and continued to stimulate the sensitive spot inside Jimin, adding a third finger when he felt the smaller man was ready. Jungkook's fingers pumped steadily into Jimin, stretching him and preparing him for Jungkook's thick length. Jimin's hips bucked wildly, chasing the pleasure Jungkook's fingers brought him. Jungkook's other hand reached down to wrap around his own aching erection, stroking it in time, with his fingers plunging into Jimin. Jungkook, please, Jimin begged, his voice hoarse. I'm ready. I need you inside me now. With a final thrust of his fingers, Jungkook withdrew them and positioned himself at Jimin's entrance. He looked down at Jimin with intense eyes, his chest heaving with each breath. Are you sure? Jungkook asked, his voice low and gravelly with desire. Jungkook's gaze bore into Jimin's, searching for any hint of hesitation or uncertainty. Finding none, he nodded slowly and began to push forward, his thick length breaching Jimin's tight entrance. Jimin gasped at the sudden intrusion, his body tensing for a moment before relaxing and allowing Jungkook to slide deeper. Jungkook groaned at the exquisite heat enveloping him, his eyes rolling back in pleasure. So tight, Jungkook grunted, pausing to give Jimin a moment to adjust. You feel amazing, Jimin. I'm okay, Jimin whispered. Keep going. With a grunt, Jungkook began to move, pulling out slowly before thrusting back in. F asterisk CK. Jimin cried out, his head thrown back in ecstasy. Just like that, Jungkook. Don't stop, Jungkook growled in response, his hips moving faster and harder. The bed creaked beneath them, the sound mixing with their moans and grunts of pleasure. Sweat beaded on their skin as they moved together, lost in the primal rhythm of their lovemaking. Jungkook leaned down to capture Jimin's lips in a fierce kiss, swallowing the smaller man's cries of ecstasy. His hands gripped Jimin's hips tightly, pulling him down to meet each thrust. Jimin wrapped his legs around Jungkook's waist, locking their bodies together. As Jungkook pounded into him, Jungkook's thrusts became more erratic as his climax approached, his movements losing their rhythm. He broke the kiss to bury his face in the crook of Jimin's neck, his hot breath ghosting over the smaller man's skin. Jimin, Jungkook panted, his voice strained. I'm close. So am I, Jimin gasped, his own release building rapidly. Come with me, Jungkook. With a final, powerful thrust, Jungkook drove deep into Jimin and held himself there. His body shuddered as he came, his hot seed filling Jimin's tight channel. The sensation pushed Jimin over the edge, and he cried out Jungkook's name as he found his own release. Jungkook collapsed onto Jimin, their chests heaving as they struggled to catch their breath. Jungkook remained still, his softening length still buried inside Jimin as they both came down from their highs. He pressed gentle kisses along Jimin's jaw and neck, murmuring words of affection against the smaller man's skin. That was incredible, Jungkook whispered, his voice filled with wonder and satisfaction. You're incredible, Jimin. Jimin smiled softly, his arms wrapping around Jungkook's waist to hold him close. You're not so bad yourself, he teased gently, pressing a kiss to Jungkook's forehead. They lay there in comfortable silence for a few moments, basking in the afterglow of their lovemaking. Eventually, Jungkook carefully withdrew from Jimin and rolled onto his side, pulling the smaller man into his arms. "Stay with me tonight?" Jungkook asked quietly, his fingers tracing idle patterns on Jimin's back. Jimin nodded without hesitation. "Of course," Jungkook smiled softly, his heart swelling with affection for the man in his arms. He tightened his hold on Jimin, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of his head. "Thank you," Jungkook murmured, his voice filled with sincerity. "For everything." Jimin tilted his head up to look at Jungkook, his eyes shining with emotion. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "Being with you is all I want." Their lips met in a slow, tender kiss, a silent promise of the love and devotion they shared. When they broke apart, Jungkook rested his forehead against Jimin's, their breaths mingling in the small space between them. "I love you," Jungkook whispered, the words falling from his lips like a sacred vow. "More than anything in this world." "I love you too," Jimin replied without hesitation, his voice thick with emotion. "Forever and always." Jungkook's heart swelled with love and happiness at Jimin's words. He pressed another soft kiss to the smaller man's lips before settling back against the pillows, pulling Jimin close to his chest. "Forever and always," Jungkook echoed, his voice filled with promise. "I'll never let you go, Jimina." Jimin snuggled into Jungkook's embrace, resting his head on the taller man's chest. He listened to the steady beat of Jungkook's heart, feeling safe and cherished in his arms as they lay there, wrapped up in each other and the warmth of their shared love. Jungkook began to hum softly. The melody was gentle and soothing, a lullaby that he often sang to Jimin when they were together like this.